This is NBC Nightly News, Monday, January 7th. Reported by John Chancellor.
Good evening. The federal government today moved to find out just how much oil companies, trucking companies, and railroads have on hand. The Federal Energy Office said it urgently needs information on existing stocks of gas and diesel fuel so that the mandatory allocation programs of these fuels can properly be implemented. And that information, once it is gathered, may answer some questions about just how bad the fuel shortage really is. This came on the first weekday of daylight saving time as millions of parents sent their children to school in the dark. There has never been daylight saving time in the winter in peacetime, and the measure is designed to save fuel. Here's a report from Kenley Jones on daylight saving time as it affected one community in Georgia.
This was the scene at the Indian Creek Elementary School just outside Atlanta at 8 o'clock in the morning on December 21st, the last day of school before the Christmas holidays. There was snow and ice on the ground in Atlanta that day. Some children had a little difficulty walking, but there was plenty of light for them to see and to be seen. This was the scene at the same school at 8 o'clock this morning, after daylight saving time went into effect. More parents than usual drove their children to school today rather than let them walk in the dark. If that keeps up, the extra gasoline used will offset at least part of any saving in electricity which may result from the switch to daylight time. But the biggest drawback as far as school officials and police are concerned is the danger that darkness brings to children who do walk to school and who must cross busy streets to get there. Some safety patrol guards have been given battery-lighted stop signs in an effort to help drivers see them better.
Is this a more dangerous situation than it was before?
It really is, because I just can't see the children, you know.
You can't see them?
I can hardly see them.
Parents have been asked to dress their children in light-colored clothing to make them more visible and even to give them flashlights if possible.
First time I took a flashlight to school.
Does it help?
Yes, it helps.
Good.
Bye.
As the days grow longer, there will be more daylight during the early morning hours, and the danger to school children will diminish. In the meantime, there is concern here lest this attempt at saving energy should result in losing some lives. Kenley Jones, NBC News, Atlanta.
The Supreme Court today turned down an appeal from two gasoline station operators who wanted a hearing in connection with their fight against Phase 4 price controls. The Ford Motor Company said it is calling back some laid-off workers to help build more small cars, which use less fuel. The White House announced that the president will save fuel by flying back from California to Washington the way he got there, on a commercial jet. We'll have a special and detailed report on the program tonight from Jack Perkins, who will be taking a careful look at the profits being made by the big oil companies. And we'll have the rest of the news, including a report that the Egyptians and the Israelis may be getting close to a preliminary settlement.
My goodness, sounds like you folks sure lead a busy life.
Well, living in the city does get hectic, Mama. Sometimes I have trouble falling asleep.
Well, everyone does once in a while.
Oh, I know. Don't you think I remember you telling Dad, John, take Sominex. So that's what I do. I take Sominex, and it helps me relax and feel drowsy so I can get to sleep.
With a lot less trouble, right?
With a lot less trouble, Mama.
Sominex. It helps take the trouble out of falling asleep.
Like so many others, I have arthritis. So do several of my friends. The way they talked about Exocane sounded too good to be true.
This is Exocane. Exocane medicated foam, the only leading rub containing benzocaine, the fast-acting anesthetic that deadens pain up to hours at a time. Exocane starts to penetrate immediately to temporarily deaden minor aches and pains of arthritis.
I do feel less pain with Exocane.
Fast-acting Exocane to temporarily deaden minor arthritis pain.
Egyptian and Israeli military men continued their talks on troop disengagement today in Geneva, Switzerland. The word from Geneva is that Israel is preparing a troop withdrawal offer. And as we learned from Richard Valeriani in Washington, the United States is optimistic about the prospects of the Israeli offer.
An agreement between Israel and Egypt on separating their forces appears to be fairly close. Secretary of State Kissinger's conversations with both sides have convinced him that the Israelis are now ready to withdraw their forces to the Mitla Pass and other strategic passes in the Sinai, while the Egyptians are now willing to reduce the size of their force on the east bank of the Suez Canal. Such details as the kinds of weapons that will remain on the east bank and possible buffer zones must still be negotiated. Once the Israelis have put a proposal into specific terms, Kissinger will probably return to Egypt to present it personally to President Sadat, possibly within the next week or 10 days. What happens in Cairo will then determine whether or not Kissinger has to go back to Jerusalem. The Israeli proposal will envision the reopening of the Suez Canal, and a disengagement agreement will lead, in turn, to a lifting of the Arab oil boycott against the United States. Richard Valeriani, NBC News at the State Department.
Valeriani also learned today that the Assistant Secretary of State, most experienced in Middle East affairs, Joseph Sisko, will not be leaving the department to become president of Hamilton College. Sisko will instead be promoted to Undersecretary for Political Affairs, the third most important job at the State Department. The oil crisis today produced further changes in world currencies, mainly with the Japanese yen. The yen fell about 7% more today against the American dollar because Japan imports almost all of its oil. On European money markets, the American dollar rose in value, in some places to the highest level in a year. Again, Europe, like Japan, is suffering a worse oil crisis than the United States. In Washington, the Pentagon reported today that South Vietnam now is getting almost all of its oil on the open market and is no longer getting oil from the United States. In Cambodia, rebel forces today stepped up their attacks on areas near the capital, Phnom Penh. The fighting was particularly heavy 7 miles northwest of Phnom Penh, and the government sent 3,000 reinforcements to the area to strengthen defense lines. Rebel rocket attacks on Phnom Penh have been an almost daily occurrence, and civilians the victims. Lives lost, people wounded, and women left to mourn the dead. The attacks on the civilian population of Phnom Penh appear to be deliberate. The government faces the additional difficulty of having the main highway from Phnom Penh to Cambodia's biggest deepwater port cut in several places by the insurgents. The tanks rumble up and down the highway trying to get at the rebels, and they're followed by government troops whose morale is not the highest. Today's fighting was only 7 miles from Phnom Penh's airport. Britain tightened security arrangements around Heathrow and other airports today because of terrorist threats. The British are faced not only with threats of more violence from the Irish Republican Army, but from Arab terrorists as well. And the Arab threat of violence led to military precautions against major international airports all over Europe. The British are somehow living through an even greater crisis, the economic devastation brought about by labor slowdowns and energy shortages, which have put the country on a 3-day work week. Today, coal miners and locomotive engineers refused again to work overtime until their wage demands are met.
Are you concerned about America's productivity? Today, lots of people are. Although we're still one of the most productive nations, other countries are offering stiff competition. That's why, at United States Steel, we're doing all we can to improve our own productivity. Like this, the Roger Blau. We designed this enormous new ship to carry iron ore across the Great Lakes to our steel mills. It has nearly twice the capacity of most Great Lakes ore carriers, and that means much greater efficiency for U.S. Steel. Bigger ships, better equipment, technical innovations in our mines and mills. These are some of the things U.S. Steel is doing to stay competitive in the world's markets. We'd like to think that helps keep America moving, too. At United States Steel, we're involved.
There were more illegal moves today in connection with the Senate Watergate Committee's subpoenas for White House tapes and documents. The president last week defied the committee's subpoenas for almost 500 tapes and documents. Over the weekend on Meet the Press, Vice President Ford suggested there might be room for compromise, but there was no indication of that from the White House today. Here's more on the story from Carl Stern.
The Senate committee moved quickly today to make the best use of a compromise, despite signs that the White House hadn't offered one and won't accept one. In response to Gerald Ford's suggestion, the committee began ranking all the things it subpoenaed by priority. Chairman Sam Ervin said he'd accept a compromise. But administration officials said there was no compromise proposal, that Ford had spoken off the top of his head. Whatever happens, the committee wants to keep in its subpoena some very specific questions about the dairymen's contributions and about the business activities of the president's family and friends. By the time the case is resolved in court, the committee will already have begun drafting its report on most of the other matters anyway. Carl Stern, NBC News, Washington.
John Doerr, the chief counsel of the House Judiciary Committee, the man in charge of the committee's impeachment inquiry, gave a closed-door briefing to 10 committee members today. We don't know what was said, but we do know that the Judiciary Committee, which often divides along quarrelsome party lines, was a model of togetherness today. One reason is that the Republicans on the committee have picked their own minority counsel. Ray Scherer covered the story.
Senior members of the committee broke their vacations today to hear the new counsel, John Doerr, report on the mountains of impeachment material he has begun to sort through. There was an unusual show of bipartisanship as the ranking GOP member, Edward Hutchison of Michigan, presented the chief counsel for the Republicans, Albert Jenner, prominent Chicago trial lawyer.
Mr. Jenner and the lawyers of the minority will work in total and complete cooperation with the special counsel of the committee, Mr. Doerr. We do not intend to set up any separate organization.
I have confidence in John Doerr, I have confidence in myself, and I have confidence in all of the members of the great House Judiciary Committee of the United States House of Representatives. And they are objective men. I've seen nothing prior to this time and throughout this meeting will lead me to feel other than an affirmation of that viewpoint.
While everything was friendly as could be today, the inquiry has barely started. And the question is, can today's bipartisan spirit survive the great political pressures that will be generated between now and the time the committee is supposed to report on impeachment at the end of April? Ray Scherer, NBC News, at the House Judiciary Committee.
3 of the men who were caught in the Watergate were told today that they'd be let out of jail. Eugenio Martinez, Frank Sturgis, and Virgilio Gonzalez will be freed on parole next March. They've been serving sentences of 1 to 4 years. And the latest Harris poll shows that because of Watergate, a majority of those polled would favor a special presidential election this year if the Supreme Court said it would be constitutional. 53% said they would favor that, 37% disagreed.
You know, when we first got married, we spent more money on camping equipment than we did on furnishing our apartment.
Yeah.
But we won't live like this forever.
That's why we opened a savings account at a savings and loan. We picked a savings and loan because we found that they finance most of the homes in the country.
When we find the house we want, our savings will be our down payment. Well, we figure, why not start out with people who can help us get all the way home?
Right.
Your savings and loan wants you to know how money works.
Loyalty. You'll find it in the fans in Arnie's Army. And when it comes to automobiles, there's loyalty too. To Cadillac, historically the car with the highest percentage of repeat buyers in the land. For 74, there's finer engine performance and new rolling smoothness in the ride. And Cadillac resale value traditionally leads all U.S. car makes. Cadillac 74, more than ever America's #1 luxury car.
High tides were forecast for the East Coast tomorrow because of the peculiar alignment of the sun and the moon. The moon also is in its fullest phase and unusually close to the Atlantic shoreline. But the weather there is relatively clear, which minimizes the threat of flooding. On the West Coast, the situation is far different. High tides and severe winter storms have caused beach erosion along the California coast. And in Southern California, there were gale warnings and the threat of more rain and snow. Roy Neal reports.
2 big storms have dropped about 6 inches of rain in Southern California since last Thursday. Damage has been relatively light, but there have been some mudslides close to some homes. Hardest hit has been Topanga Canyon, an area where brush fires last fall burned off the watershed. Residents have been warned that they may have to evacuate, but until now, the mud and rock slides have been in the hills, not near the houses. There's been heavy snow in the mountains, up to 45 inches in some places, and access roads to mountain resorts have been closed. East of San Diego, the Air Force used a snowplow to rescue 40 people stranded in campers for 2 days. But most of the mountain resorts are in good shape, and highways over mountain passes to San Francisco and Las Vegas are open. Traffic has been a mess, and some roads, including a short stretch of the Golden State Freeway and the Pacific Coast Highway, have been blocked. There is no immediate relief in sight. The Weather Bureau says the heavy rains and snow in the mountains will continue, at least through tomorrow. Roy Neal, NBC News, Los Angeles.
Author Clifford Irving, who wrote a fake autobiography of Howard Hughes, has entered a rehabilitation center in New York City. He was paroled from federal prison last Friday after serving part of a 2.5-year sentence for conspiracy to defraud. Clifford Irving's wife, Edith, is still in jail in Switzerland for her part in the hoax. Irving obviously was relieved to be out of prison and was in good spirits when he checked in at the rehabilitation center.
In his first morning at the new treatment center, Irving went through the normal routine of signing back in after his weekend pass. Then a meeting with officials of the center to work out a rehabilitation plan for finding a new job and a place to live after he's released in February. The plan will eventually have to be approved by his parole officer. Irving's next stop was in his new room, which he'll share with another resident. Although his new accommodations are a far cry from his glamorous lifestyle before the hoax, he says he doesn't mind. He's just happy to be on the outside again.
Being out is almost unreal to me. There's a feeling of total disorientation because I was only told at 8:30 Friday morning that I could go, and I had to be out at 9:30. And it was, in a sense, it's the best way to go because then you have no fear and paranoia before you get out. But it's totally upsetting. And I walked around the city in a kind of a daze for the first day or two, with maybe still.
Middle-class prisoners like Irving usually aren't sent to treatment centers like this prior to parole, but Irving went to court to win the right to come here. The decision tells something about his still unhappy situation.
I'm broke. I need a job in the sense of a publisher. I need a place to stay for my family. So I am eminently eligible for the community treatment center like this.
What would you say to people who don't believe that Clifford Irving is as broke as he claims to be?
Well, that's not my problem. That's their problem.
A former information officer for the Ohio National Guard told reporters today that former Ohio Governor James Rhodes was in an inflammatory mood when he visited the Kent State campus prior to the shooting of 4 students. The former Guard officer, Michael Delaney, talked to reporters after testifying before a federal grand jury investigation of the incident. Rhodes was governor when the National Guardsmen killed the students during an anti-war protest in May of 1970. The lawyer handling publication rights for Alexander Solzhenitsyn said today that the Soviet author would donate for humanitarian purposes all earnings from his new book on Soviet labor camps and the Soviet secret police. The book was attacked again on Moscow television, this time by a French communist journalist. But 5 Russian dissidents, including the physicist Andrei Sakharov, defended Solzhenitsyn's right to publish his book outside the Soviet Union.
I keep all the things I use on my floor. You know, cleaner, shiner, stripper. Right in here. Johnson's Step Saver. Anti-damp mop. It cleans, shines, even strips with self-stripping action. A new coat of Step Saver dissolves its old coat, loosens dirt, even black heel marks. I just mop them away. Self-stripping Step Saver cleans deep, shines bright, and ends build up. It could be all you'll need to use on your floor.
I always gave the furniture I built rubbed-in Paste Wax Beauty, but now I get Paste Wax Beauty instantly with New Pledge. This table was rubbed with Paste Wax for 12 minutes and a lot of muscle. Now I'll dust this one with New Pledge. You know, Pledge now has an enriched formula containing key ingredients found in Johnson Paste Wax. me, it's a dead ringer for the Paste Wax Shine. So, for the rubbed-in beauty of Paste Wax Instantly, dust with new pledge.
And finally tonight, our man Jack Perkins will attempt to answer a question asked by a lot of people these days. Are the oil companies making too much money? Oil profits are way up, and some people think the prices are up because of a shortage caused by the oil companies to drive up the prices. We asked Perkins to take a careful look at this, and here is what he learned.
Here are the 5 largest oil companies in America and how their profits, third quarter 73, compared to the year before. Exxon, up 81%. Mobil, up 64%. Texaco, up 48%. Gulf, up 91%. Standard of California, up 51%. Does this mean oil company profits are excessive? Windfall? Oil companies say, on the contrary, profits ought to be even higher.
Gone up greatly, but they've moved up from a very low base. In terms of the capital requirements of the industry, they don't appear to be excessive at this point in time.
What are the capital requirements?
Well, Chase Manhattan Bank estimates that in the 15 years from 1970 to 1985, the industry will need $600 billion in new capital for the free world oil supplies.
So, by that token, you figure the profits are not high enough yet?
That's right.
Very rapid. Dr. Fred Allvine at Georgia Tech does independent research into oil companies. He's a consultant to a Senate subcommittee on this. He says what bothers him is not that oil company profits are up, but how they got that way. He sees a possible connivance.
The profits were what I would consider shortage-created profits. There's an element of illegality to them, as far as I'm concerned. The industry definitely, during 1972, took steps to short production, to make the U.S. very tight with regard to the availability of petroleum products. And then once they had done this, then the profits themselves increased.
So there was a shortage, the prices increased, the profits increased.
It's a simple matter. We have a shortage. You have a shortage, the prices increase. And
but it was a shortage which you believe was consciously created by oil companies.
Based upon the materials we studied, it looks like several of the major oil companies deliberately took steps to reduce output to create this shortage situation, which then subsequently permitted them to significantly increase their rates of profit.
Here is what Dr. Allvine's research shows. In the first half of 72, he says the 10 biggest companies cut back their refinery production. They ran their refineries at only an average of 89% of capacity. That was an average 3% less than they had been running the year before, and it was less than they could have been running. Some oil companies said they cut back production because there was less demand in early 72. Dr. Allvine's research shows the opposite, that there was 5% more demand. We asked companies about Dr. Allvine's research. Some would not respond. One said it's too complicated to try to explain to you. One did respond.
Well, of course, I can only talk for Shell Oil, and all I can say is that there's been no attempt whatsoever on our part to create a shortage.
Are fuel shortages good for the big oil companies?
I think what you have to say is that obviously a seller's market is always better than a buyer's market, and therefore profits are going to be higher at a time of scarcity. This is just a basic fact of economic life.
And the fact of economic life is now the oil companies have increased their profits. So the question is, where does the money go as profits grow in the oil industry?
They go back into exploration for new oil fields and capital investments for facilities.
His company, Standard of California, this latest year has been spending $200 million searching for new oil, as here in California's San Joaquin Valley. $175 million bringing out oil in already discovered sites. $160 million building and expanding refineries, facilities. $200 million on transportation, especially building new tankers. And he says his company needs even larger profits to do even more of all this. But he also says most of the profits are not being used in this country. And this bothers some people. The recent history of American oil companies is that more than half the money they spend to explore for oil, they spend overseas, which does not help this country toward the self-sufficiency which President Nixon has set as a goal.
What bothers me, you see some of these companies with these vast increases in profits. Where are they going to be using these profits? If they're used for increasing exploration and development and production of crude oil in the United States, secure crude oil, then that, I think, can be a justifiable reason for increased profits. However, if the profits continue to be used, like they have been for the last decade or more, to accelerate exploration and development abroad, then I would be very troubled about this.
So, about oil company profits, three things. First, they are up greatly. Second, at least one scholar believes oil companies consciously created the shortages that would let their profits rise. And third, it seems the question now to be asked is, what will be done with the profits? Will they be used to explore for oil in this country and help work toward the self-sufficiency in oil the president wants? Or will they be used mainly overseas, as the companies have been doing? Jack Perkins, NBC News, Los Angeles.
Last month, the president proposed to the Congress that a tax be imposed on the oil companies so that no one of them could make windfall profits during the fuel shortage. The legislation was blocked in the House just before the Congress went home for its holiday vacation. So as of now, there is no tax on windfall profits, and we're not sure what the tax will be if it emerges from the Congress later this year. Good night for NBC News.
Call a chainsaw. You've got power by the hour in your hand. With McCulloch, you're the master, 'cause you keep a-cutting faster. You're in luck when you got a McCulloch chainsaw.
I've known about Alka-Seltzer for over 40 years now. And I've never taken it for every little ache and pain. I wouldn't do that with any medicine. I take Alka-Seltzer when I get an aching head together with an upset stomach because it's got specially buffered aspirin with antacids. If I still don't feel okay, then I'll call the doctor because when I take Alka-Seltzer, I know I've done the most that I can do by myself. I've known that for over 40 years.
NBC Nightly News has been brought to you by Miles Laboratories Incorporated, makers of Alka-Seltzer, for relief of headache with upset stomach. Alka-Seltzer.
Get off my back. I ain't married to you. Now, what do I care? Come on.
You married to me, all right, Joker. And here's the ring.
Academy Award winners Sidney Poitier and Tony Curtis are dynamite in The Defiant Ones. On NBC Monday night at the movies, tonight at 9, 8 Central Time.
Telecasting service of the National Life and Accident Insurance Company. This is Channel 4, WSMTV, Nashville.
It's time for the 4th Annual Boat Show, sponsored by the Middle Tennessee Boat Dealers Association, January 9 through 13 at Nashville's Municipal Auditorium. See all that's new in the fun world of boating for 74. Be eligible for the big door prize, a complete fishing rig, boat, motor, trailer, many accessories, total retail value over $4,000 to be given away the last night of the show. Proceeds go to the Lions Club Site Conservation Program. Buy tickets from any member of the area Lions Club. Let's go boating.
Hey, down, man. Where you go, man?